Today's webinar on Happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm Paige Schaffer, CEO of IRIS powered by Generali, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. Next slide. So we're here to unpack the findings of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance State of Scams in the USA report. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, don't worry, you'll have a crash course today. If you want to download it now, you can use the QR code on the screen to do so. Very quickly, before we dive in, let's review a few housekeeping items. First, questions are welcome, so please type your questions in the question box and we'll address them during the Q&A period. If you have additional questions after the webinar concludes, you can email us. We'll have our contact information shown on the screen at the end of today's session. Finally, the webinar is being recorded, so don't feel like you need to take fast and furious notes. A link to the recording will be emailed to all participants. Next slide. So let's get into this. Perhaps the biggest headline from the report is that scams are no longer occasional threats. They've become part of daily life. Americans now face an average of 377 scam attempts a year. That's more than one every single day. And these scams aren't just random messages or phone calls. 81% of scam encounters occur on digital platforms with direct messaging. This means that the scams are showing up exactly where we communicate and connect the most. The financial impact is alarming. The average stolen per victim was more than $1,000. For most people, this loss can be really painful. And despite high confidence levels in spotting scams, 70% of Americans were victimized last year. Now at IRIS, we can't say that we're terribly surprised by these numbers. We see the impact of scams every day with victims who call into our resolution center to help them recover. They don't just suffer financial losses, they experience high stress and significant disruption to their life as well. This is why we're so committed to bringing education, tools, and experts together to help feel more secure. And that's exactly what today is about. We've gathered a panel of leaders across research, finance, tech, and consumer protection to understand why scams are growing so fast. And more importantly, what we can do to fight back. With that, let's introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Jorij Abraham, Managing Director at the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. Jorij leads international efforts to bring governments, businesses, and consumer organizations together to fight scams worldwide. Thanks, Jorij. Next, we have Kate Griffin, Inclusive Finance Director at the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program. Kate focuses on building financial systems that work better for low-income and marginalized communities. Welcome, Kate. Joining us as well is Chris Olson, co-founder of the CEO of the Media Trust. Chris works to make the internet safer by helping companies manage digital risks and protect users online. And finally, we're joined by Seckin Yilgoren, Senior Vice President of Security Solutions at Mastercard. He brings deep expertise with products and solutions that help to address today's cyber threats and fraud tactics. So let's dive in. First, I'd like to turn to Jorij. Jorij, you've been looking at scam data not just in the US, but globally. Why are scams escalating so quickly, and what surprised you the most in the US data compared to other countries?
We see scams continue to grow very rapidly globally. But if I compare the United States against the rest of the world, and we did a survey amongst 50,000 consumers worldwide, America's clearly at the top in the number of scam attempts every day. I mean, Paige, you were sharing that 377 messages are received by Americans every year, which is more than one per day. That's a ridiculous large amount. And we estimate that based on our survey that 29% of the Americans receive really a message every day. So that's one of the big differences if you compare the USA with other countries. What also surprised me based on the survey we did is who's getting scammed. The the general belief is that especially elderly people fall for a scam. That's absolutely no longer the case. It's young people, it's the younger generations. That's globally and also in the United States. What is different in the United States is that it's also very highly educated and parents, and especially living in suburban regions. So there we see a difference also with other countries. We don't know why parents in the USA are becoming a victim of a scam more than in other countries. Um, and then I think the third big difference, and that's really a big concern, is one of the questions we ask is how confident are you that you can recognize a scam? And globally, 73% of the global population says, I'm very confident or confident that I can recognize a scam. In America, this is 81%. 81% of the Americans believe they can recognize a scam, and then unfortunately they get scammed just like everybody else. So those are three of the things which, for me, were a surprise to see if you compare the USA against the rest of the world. Back to you, Paige.
Yeah, I think people get desensitized to it. There's just so many, you know. We know that collaboration is at the heart of GASA's mission. Can you share an example of partnership or initiative that's been especially effective in reducing scams at scale?
Of course. So the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, what we try to achieve is really get all the stakeholders involved in better protecting consumers from scams. Governments, law enforcement, banks, telecom operators, the social media platforms. We now have more than 120 members, and it's working. I mean, we have Mastercard, we have Google, Meta, many of the banks, many telecom operators sharing knowledge and really working together on better solutions. And one of the solutions we launched last January together with Google is the Global Signal Exchange. I mean, we are always talking about we should share more data so that we can fight cybercrime better, but it never happens. And together with Google and now also Mastercard and others have joined, like Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, we are really started to share signals on bad websites, bad email addresses, etc. And now already 1 million signals are shared every day to improve our algorithms to recognize scams or take down bad websites. So that's a good example of what we've achieved in the last year.
Excellent. Kate, I'd like to bring you in here. The report highlights that lower education and rural populations often feel less confident spotting scams. From a policy and systems perspective, what's one step you'd like to see from government or the private sector to make scam protections more equitable and accessible across income groups?
It's an important question. At the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program, we've spent the last year convening a national task force on fraud and scam prevention. And the task force was composed really of institutions that span the whole life cycle of a scam, from the communications platforms we've discussed where scams can be starting, social media, telecommunications, technology, through the financial services industry, law enforcement, and victim serving organizations. And really, when we convened the task force, our focus and animating question was, how do we actually prevent these scams from ever, or these criminals from ever reaching consumers in the first place, any consumer? What we heard from task force members time and again was that it's quite a patchwork quilt of possible solutions at play today. And the report that we released a couple of weeks ago, which is essentially a blueprint for a national strategy to prevent scams, the #1 recommendation in that report calls on our government to name scams as a national priority. That sounds really simple, but what we heard time and again was actually by taking such a forceful action, naming someone in the US government in charge of scam prevention and coordinating that strategy across federal agencies, that also sends a very strong signal to the private sector in terms of their role and set of responsibilities in empowering their scam prevention activities. And so for us, that's really the sort of number one call to action that we have at the moment, coming from the experience of convening that task force.
Excellent. The report also highlights that scams are eroding consumer trust across digital platforms and financial systems. What role should businesses and policymakers play in rebuilding that trust, and what kinds of private sector defenses do you think are most effective in achieving that?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and as you can imagine, the answer to that is quite complicated. So the report that I just discussed that we released a couple of weeks ago, which the participants on today's webinar can find at fraudtaskforce.aspeninstitute.org, really kind of underscores the data that we're seeing in this State of Scams report, and says there are probably 5 key things that the private sector needs to do and 5 key things that the public sector needs to do, among dozens of other recommendations. For bold government leadership, the highlights include empowering private sector responses through looking at the incentives and legal frameworks that provide clearer guidelines to the private sector about what government is expecting them to do to take action, and actually helps to provide some, shall we say, good Samaritan legal safe harbors that the private sector needs in order to take those kinds of actions. We need to drive better law enforcement and intelligence outcomes by tasking top officials with clear anti-scam goals, funding, and cross-jurisdictional authority. We saw just last week an exciting announcement about a set of joint US-UK sanctions against Southeast Asian transnational criminal organizations behind the scam centers. It is those actions and more that we need to come from our law enforcement agencies. And we also need improved measurement. Having a single measure of the state of scams in the US, really understanding both where we are today and what tracking those trends over time will be incredibly important to mounting a cohesive response. In the private sector, there are a few things that stand out. We talk about strengthening system defenses, how we can block inauthentic actors and have better controls that will scrutinize the trustworthiness of actors who are engaged in activities, particularly those that are at higher risk to be scams, things like paid advertising. We talk about investments in the infrastructure that will build the private sector's capability to detect suspicious activity, like the global signal exchange that Jorij talks about. And then we need to build the evidence base for the private sector around scam disruption practices. When we know that a consumer is in contact with a criminal who is trying to scam them, what are the best practices that we have today that disrupt that and help break the spell and stop the consumer from taking further action? And finally, building more robust and actionable intelligence sharing between the private sector and law enforcement is another critical action that we need to see taken.
Excellent. Thanks, Kate. Okay, I believe we're going to do a live poll question next for the audience. So everyone will have a minute to input their answer. And the question is, if you or someone close to you has been a scam victim, what type of support would have been most helpful? Faster money recovery process, emotional counseling resources, clear reporting guidance, better prevention education. I haven't been a scam victim and don't know anyone who has. All right. Panel, any thoughts on this one?
I think the last one is interesting. Only one person says he hasn't been a scam victim and doesn't know anybody. That tells us enough of how big the scam problem is becoming.
Yeah.
Just to add on that, I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I think the education is very key here. So, like, there are still so many occasions that we don't know what to do or who to call when there's a scam. Am I calling my bank? Am I calling law enforcement? Am I calling someone else? So I think the education piece will be very, very critical for us.
Agreed.
I can actually confirm what Seckin is saying. also a difference between our USA report and the global figures are that way more Americans do not know where to report the scam, or they do think that it doesn't make a difference to report it. So that's also something we saw in our data. Sorry, Paige, please.
No problem. I just was looking. It looks like we've got a tie between faster money recovery and clear reporting, with education not far behind. I think it takes a village with lots of different coverages to be able to take care of folks. All right, let us transition to Chris. Scams often target people through platforms with direct messaging, such as Gmail and Facebook. From your work at the Media Trust, how much responsibility do you think tech platforms should take for keeping users safe, and are they doing enough?
Another big question. So I'd start with, when we talk about tech platforms, we need to think broadly. Social media, e-commerce sites, big brand websites, mobile apps, connected television, and then the advertising networks that kind of monetize all of them. They make up the digital ecosystem where consumer behavior is tracked and scams and malware are most often initiated. Yes, tech platforms have a great responsibility to protect consumers who are their customers from digital attacks. Seniors, children, George is mentioning parents earlier, just to name a few. The internet's primary model depends on platforms knowing you and then enabling others to buy your attention. And so unfortunately, when bad actors are there, that means that any buyer can target any person anytime, even those that mean you harm. And many of today's laws actually free internet platforms from legal responsibility for the content served on their platforms. So using the internet is a consumer beware situation. All that said, most platforms don't want their customers to be targeted with scams, malware, unsuitable content. Many platforms prioritize digital safety. They employ significant budgets, a lot of tech work, large teams to try to find and remove harmful content before advertising content and consumers are impacted. I think we'll know that the industry is doing enough when no consumers are being attacked by internet content. We've got a long way to go, and until then, no industry is doing enough.
So some job security there for you. The Media Trust positions itself as guardians of the open internet. How do we balance an open internet while enforcing stricter protections against scams?
Yeah, so I think first, scams are not random. They're highly targeted attacks against very specific audiences. As I mentioned before, when we talk about the open internet, we're really talking about most of the digital ecosystem, websites and apps and social media content, even streaming services. It's all funded by tracking users and targeted advertising and content. That targeting drives the economy of the open internet by collecting all sorts of data, what we do, where we are, who we talk with, right, who we're connected to. And that enables millions and millions of buyers or other companies or people to target us. And that's from major brands to political campaigns to a local florist. It's the most powerful targeting system humanity's ever seen. And so the average consumer really has no chance against bad actors who leverage that tech. Couple points that are really important. Traditional cyber protects machines. So it's protecting databases, it's protecting networks, it's protecting devices. But a lot of companies, a lot of institutions that we speak with kind of fall back to cyber as the model to try to protect people. Scams target people, as I mentioned at the beginning. The privacy industry is now a $300 billion industry that's mostly leveraged by corporations to protect corporations from data compliance lawsuits. And so with those two things together, spending on consumer privacy and cybersecurity has really resulted in protecting machines and corporations, not people. So malicious actors use targeting to deliver scams, misinformation, cyber attacks at people. And so in order to balance the successful open internet and consumer safety, I think we have to first recognize that scams target people and not machines. If the open internet's going to thrive, companies that enable targeting of people must prioritize digital safety for people.
Lots to think about there. Thanks, Chris. Let's transition to Seckin. Let's talk about scam recovery, Seckin. Over 80% of scam victims report incidents to payment services, but fewer than half are able to recover their money. Where is the breakdown happening and how can we fix it?
Thank you for the question. You guys can still hear me, correct? Perfect. All right, so let me try to share some context before the solution. So first of all, not all payment transaction types have the same protections. There is zero liability protection for unauthorized transactions done by the card products united to the United States. This means that when a Mastercard debit card or credit card is used to make a purchase in the store, over the telephone, or via mobile device, consumers will be able to get their money back if the transaction has been done by a scammer. This is actually working very well to develop the trust to the ecosystem and to help all of us to do more digital payments and e-commerce transactions. Having said that, there's a much greater risk on real-time payment transactions. I'm referring to transactions like money transfer, peer-to-peer, and crypto wallets. These payment transactions offer speed and convenience, which is great for the consumers, and it resides outside of Mastercard rails. So many of our franchise rules, therefore consumer protections, are more limited. In the United States, protection rules for these transactions can be determined by bank or case by case, which is not optimal for consumers. And the most important point is that these real-time transactions, when the money is transferred or moved, it cannot be refunded or returned back from the financial institution. And that's why most of the scams are happening. The fraudsters know that, so they are trying to scam you onto doing these kind of transactions versus card transactions. As a solution, I think education, we just talked about this, is key from all the players, including networks, issuers, ecosystem partners, like the partners we have all here today in the call. The more we can educate customers regarding scams and how to protect against them, it will be critical. And close partnerships with groups like CASA, Aspen Institute, to bring different industry players together and align how we can limit effectiveness of scams by developing joint solutions would go a long way.
Yeah, I think Mastercard really has been a terrific leader in partnerships with a multitude of security practices. From your vantage point at Mastercard, what innovations in payment security are you most excited about that would help prevent consumers from falling victim to scams?
To succeed and protect people from scams, we need to embrace a proactive and maybe multi-layered approach. It needs to include technology and also franchise innovation. And then, as we discussed, we need to elevate the global awareness and market education, and that will be very, very critical. So, technology perspective, as Mastercard, we leverage our global payments and identity data, as well as the leading threat intelligence insights, to help assess different ways to share and break down data silos that fraudsters or scammers are able to exploit. Especially when it comes to sophisticated fraud attacks, identity scams are very difficult to detect because at the end, all of the individual identity element is real. The fraudster is using Seckin's name, which is valid. They are using Chris's email, which is valid, and they are using Paige's phone number, which is also valid. The problem is they are not connected. So it's not about validating the identity element is real, but it's the way that they are linked together that uncovers the fraudulent nature or the scam nature of the pieces. That's why it becomes critical to look at different identity attributes, additional data points, device intelligence, behavioral insights, to see how these data points are really linked together and used before, or it's just a synthetic identity it was using just to account takeover process. So naturally, the AI is actually very useful here, but also fraudsters are also using that. But there's leveraging AI to make sure that we leverage more data points and insights to ensure this is Seckin's information, and we really believe that it's Seckin who is doing this transaction. It will be critical. From franchise perspective from Mastercard perspective, we are uniquely positioned and has very deep experience on how to manage fraud across payments and multi-party ecosystems. And we want to make sure how we are properly vetting the merchants in order to join the different ecosystem, and we want to use the use to help issuers to get the greater intelligence and the right information on risky merchants. So when there's a transaction coming up, they know like how risky it is and how it is genuine it is. So and it really helps the approval decision and to avoid fraud.
Excellent. I really appreciate the insights from the panel. Really helpful and good information. Now let's do one more live poll. This is going to be a quick one. We'll give everyone 30 seconds to input their answers. So if you had to choose one, who would take the lead role in fighting scams? Tech platforms, financial institutions, government, individual consumers? Yeah, I would think this would be fairly split across the board here. I think everybody plays a role. What does the panel think?
Certainly the approach that we've taken has been that everybody has a job to do. The criminals are exploiting the spaces in between all of these systems, and it's by locking arms together across all of these sectors that we'll truly get the job done.
I agree with Kate. I think it's a shared responsibility of the tech platforms, of the banks, but let's not forget the telecom operators, the internet industry, the hosters, but also the consumers. I mean, they also have a responsibility to protect themselves and their family and friends by helping each other. And if they get an offer in, that they reach out to friends, hey, I got this offer. Is it a good one or is it a scam? So I agree with what Kate is saying, that it's really a shared responsibility. And governments, I think, in general, need to facilitate that we can fight scammers easier. Privacy legislation is really blocking a lot of things at the moment, and we need to find a better balance between privacy, which is very important, but also making sure that we can actually exchange information to catch the scammers.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like from the reporting that 75 to 80% of folks are aware that it's a scam. So how best to, it's the one foot in front of the other as far as the black hats versus the white hats, right? How quickly can you get ahead with kind of conquering the scam? Sorry, Chris, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, and I think it also, we need to look at the various parts of the kill chain. So tech platforms need to be responsible for the content that's delivering through their platforms, right? So that's finding scams before they ever reach consumers. Financial institutions need to make sure at that point of transaction that they're knowing who they're doing business with or who the consumer's doing business with. That's at a later stage. I think governments, as George was mentioning, need to make it easier for tech platforms, financial institutions, and telecoms to share information and do better, right? So there's a lot of restrictions the way we have legislation set up today. But I'd also offer that digital are the streets that we're living on today, right? So we spend much more time looking at our digital devices than we are actually walking outside. And so policing needs to be part of the digital ecosystem, and that doesn't mean governments going after tech platforms or financial institutions. It means governments supporting them and helping them. We all need to work on this together.
Agreed.
And maybe one more point on consumers. So fraudsters are sharing so much themselves. So if they exploit something, they will share with everyone just to make sure that they can abuse this. As consumers, we should say, if you get a text which seems sketchy or fishy, just tell your friends or tell the others by saying don't click on them, because it will just, if somebody has a 1 second of inattention and they will just click on one SMS message, then the fraudsters, they got what they need. And so we should also be able to share the information. If you receive emails or if you receive texts, tell your friends, tell the others, so they won't miss it as well.
Great. Well, let's do a quick lightning round before we end our panelist questions. We're going to have each of our panelists give a last tidbit of advice. If there's one prevention habit you wish every consumer would adopt starting today, what would that be? George?
I think scams are getting too good. We see AI being used more and more by scammers and making it very, very hard, even for experts, to recognize a scam. I actually, sorry, Paige, I'm going to make two recommendations. One is talk with your friends, talk with your family, because the more time you take to discuss what you're seeing, what is being offered to you, the less chance scammers have. We know this. And the second one is buy protection. I mean, there's more and more software out there, which is unfortunately way better than you as a person to recognize a deep fake video or a fake voice call. There's a lot in the market now, and it's getting better and better. Don't be overconfident and say, just like 80% of the Americans, I can recognize a scam.
Yeah. Kate?
So it's such an important question, and I think I'm gonna steal Jorij's approach and use too, which is, I can't underscore enough the importance of talking about it. I know all of us have actually mentioned this today, but I think one of the other pieces of talking about it and really sharing with others, not only, oh, I saw this, it was clearly a scam, so that others become more aware of it, even sharing the stories of victimhood and helping to reduce the shame or the feelings of blame for consumers is incredibly important. And part of the storytelling that we need to do is to talk about who the criminals are. That there are sophisticated actors. In the United States context, they are largely foreign criminals targeting our wealth. And so I really feel like these kinds of narratives are very important for us to tell as a society to actually help drive prevention and reduce the blame of consumers when this happens. And the other one that I will just say, and there are a number of consumer campaigns around elements of this, is just the notion of pausing. That for the most part, there are a few times in life when our government or your financial institution needs you to move quickly. And so if someone's asking you to move money quickly, it's likely a scam. So the notion of pausing, I think, is really important.
Great. Chris?
So I'd want consumers to understand, or maybe assume, that every piece of content they see and experience online is curated for them. Whether it's an ad, it's a search result, a text message, or an email, it's designed to entice. It's designed to bring them in. And so their only real defense in that kind of situation is, before they click, take any action, even believe what they're reading, they have to know who the message is coming from. Right? Where is this starting and why is it in front of me? And if you can't verify the source, do nothing, right? Don't act. So I think that's, I just want people to understand that this is designed to bring you in. So if you don't know where it's coming from, be very careful.
Okay, and last but not least, Seckin.
I really like what Kate said. I want to take it maybe a little bit one notch above, is if you receive something and it is too good to be true, for $10 you might get an iPad, or like for $50 you get like a huge LCD TV or something. It most probably is a scam. So don't fall into this. Just don't think you found the best deal ever to go to Caribbeans or everything else. It might be a scam. And the second thing is, like, definitely use multi-factor authentication. It's very easy to set up. You can set up for all of your accounts, from email to additional pieces that you, for your banking and everything. Just do that. It's easy. It's with you. You can leverage your biometrics, and it will not create you a bet. so much friction in your life, and it will actually very secure you in everything.
Excellent. All terrific suggestions. At this time, we have a few minutes left to go to questions and answers. If there are any questions, I remind that you can type them into the question box, and we can have our panelists answer. We'll give a minute.
Oh, we give it a minute, Paige. Maybe to comment on what Seckin was saying. It's a good example again how smart scammers are becoming. It indeed, as Seckin was saying, a great discount, $50 for an iPad, etc. Forget it. But now they only make it $2 or $3 cheaper to just get at the top of the best prices. And that, I mean, $2 or $3. I mean, then it becomes hard for consumers to say, oh, yeah, that's too cheap, and that makes life really hard. And we have a tradition at our summits we organize to always scam the participants, and it always works. I mean, 50% of the cybersecurity law enforcement participants, we can scam them when they're visiting our summit with a free offer for a free dinner, or doing a selfie with your ID. It always works to even scam experts.
Thanks. We do have a couple of questions, and I believe there's been a question assigned to Chris and to George. So sorry, I'm not seeing the questions in the.
I can read the question if you want me to just go ahead.
Yeah,
and. Okay. From Ken, thank you. Why don't digital channels remove bogus ads when asked? That's a long question, or long answer. So first, they turn off millions, right? So the big platforms are looking for bad things, and when they find bad, they're shutting them down at just incredibly big and rapid scale. But when a consumer or someone recommends, hey, this ad is bad, take a look at it, please take it down, a whole bunch of things happen. First, they have to find the ad. So the programmatic channels, the way that advertising works, it's often coming from a buyer, it's moving through channels. They don't know necessarily where it's coming from. So taking the time to find one out of a billion can take a long time, especially if it doesn't have, if that recommendation to turn off the ad doesn't have something that they can get directly to. So that's an internal challenge. There's cloaking, which means the ad that you're seeing may be very different than the ad that they see, which then leads to an ad fitting their legal policies. So in many countries, the law would say that certain types of gray content is legal. And so the platform is left with a challenge. Do they do what they might think is right versus what is required in the country? That creates a big problem. It just adds another element. So if they found the ad, it actually has to fit all of the objectives that they have. And I'm not defending the situation. I'm just saying it is complicated, right? These are big global businesses. And I think the last part is whose responsibility is it? And so these channels are myriad. Lots of components of the internet are coming to your device through one ad execution, and who really owns the delivery of that becomes a big challenge. So not excuses, but there are a lot of difficulties. This, I think, goes back to governments helping platforms do better. It also happens to be part of just raising the overall safety across tech platforms.
Great. And I think, George, did you receive a question?
Yes, I did. My question was from Susie. She asked, how does the general public notify the teams or companies working with Gaza about scams they are aware of? There are many in the crypto space, and law enforcement and government regulators just don't seem to have the resources to take them down. First of all, Susie, thank you very much for your question. If you see a scam happening on a platform, be it Zoom or, as you were suggesting, or any social media or marketplace, it's always good to directly report it to the platform. But it is also really good to report it to your law enforcement agency. That can be locally or FBI, Internet Crime Complaint Center, or one of the others. Because if we don't report to law enforcement, the scammer goes unnoticed. I mean, the platform will take it down, hopefully very fast. But law enforcement needs this kind of data to see what's happening, aggregate, and then take action to really where the scammer hopefully is located and get it. Paige?
Okay, I see another question has come in. Kate, would you like to field that one?
Yeah, absolutely. The question's asking about whether information on the different types of fraud are easy for consumers to find, and also asks about the actions consumers can take once they've lost money. Is there a centralized platform? Are the steps easy? And unfortunately, in the United States, the answers to all of this are, unfortunately, none of it's quite easy, and there are multiple places to potentially go. So, for example, within the federal government, there are a number of different places one could go to report a fraud, but probably the two most prominent today are the FBI and their IC3 portal and the Federal Trade Commission's fraud.gov. Both of those entities do provide annual reports that detail the types of fraud that have been reported to them. So there's no centralized platform from a government perspective. There are also a number of victim-serving organizations where you can go to report that fraud, in addition to your local or state police forces, who may or may not be equipped to help you with that case. There's still sort of uneven training for law enforcement in that regards. And so really, it's I will say what we heard time and time again in the work that we've done over the last year or so is just how confusing it is for consumers to navigate all of this, particularly after they've been scammed, the money has been lost. There's, obviously clearly other emotional things happening in that instance. One of the things we talked about in the reporting, actually in our sort of recommendations report, is the potential avenues for starting to address that problem, whether that comes from a purely government play or whether a public-private partnership might work in the United States to help create that centralized platform, and one that actually helps multiple stakeholders here, not just a centralized platform for consumers to report, but really one where there's better sharing of information for law enforcement and private sector, and where we can have a centralized repository for actually the intelligence on what scams are prevalent in the moment. So there's more work to be done in the United States to solve that problem.
Great. All right. Sorry, I am told that we are out of time for questions, and we're gonna wrap up here. I want to thank you to our incredible panelists, George, Kate, Chris, and Seckin, and to all of you for joining us. The threat of scams may feel overwhelming, but the insights we've shared today prove that there are real actions we can take to protect ourselves, our businesses, and our communities. We encourage you to download the State of Scams USA report, share it with your networks, and most importantly, to put these practices into actions. If you have questions that we weren't able to get to or address today, please send us an email at irisidentityprotection.com. We'll share the question and answers on LinkedIn, so be sure to follow us. We regularly share recent news and resources related to identity theft and cyber protection. Thank you all again for your time today. We hope to see you at one of our next events.